Hi, and welcome to my sci-fi, fantasy, and horror short fiction roundup for April 2021. And if you hear something in the background, it might be the washing machine, because for this week's recording, or this month's recording, I've been banished to the basement and the washing machine's going. So if you hear sounds in the background, that's most likely it. Anyway, I have 20 great stories for this roundup, so I'm going to dive right in. My first story for this roundup is Electronic Ghosts by Innocent Chizaram Ilo in Escape Pod, and it's narrated by Mofin Fulua Okupe. And the story kicks off with this excellent line. If Niora had died 2 weeks earlier, her daughter, Aneto, would not have resurrected her ghost. Now, from this, you might think that a story about death and ghosts would be horror, but it's not. Instead, this story masterfully twines together science fiction, family bonds and traditions, and a filament of the supernatural. I love every little bit of this wonderful story. There are so many layers here, and I especially love how storytelling is a thread that runs through the tale and through this family, and which also leads to the daughter resurrecting her mother, partly because she fears the ghost of unfinished stories. Nobody would believe, says the story, not that you can blame them, that Aneto will do what she does because she is scared the ghost of unfinished stories will haunt her. So this is just a fantastic story that is darkly funny and deeply moving. Next story pick is The Heart That Saves You May Be Your Own by Mary Haskell in Beneath Ceaseless Skies. This is a stunningly good story that is a bit of a weird western, a bit of fantasy, a bit of fairy tale and portal magic, and altogether a brilliant piece of fiction. In order to court and marry her chosen man properly and be able to wed in white and not wear the rust red of the half-married, Tabby has headed out on the prairie hunting for a unicorn, as is tradition. It's a dangerous business, this hunt, searching for a beast that comes through strange rifts in the fabric of the world. Now, Tabby is a clever, resourceful, and determined woman, and yet things do not go as hoped. I love this story for its unique take on unicorns and westerns, and I love it for the way Tabby finds a different ending than the one she thought she needed. My next story pick is also from Beneath Ceaseless Skies. It's A Stranger Goes Ashore by Adam R. Shannon. Now, in a world where the island they live on is barely able to sustain life anymore, the people of Hiora, which is the island, the people send out ships trying to find new islands to inhabit. But Alain, one of those who has set out on the expedition searching for new habitats, is losing hope. Every island he's seen is unable to sustain life. And when the crew he's part of do locate an island where a few people are able to eke out a strange existence, very also strange forces seem to be at work. And Elaine eventually comes to a mind-bending conclusion about the nature of the world and the islands and those who go searching for new places to belong. This story is an incisive, thought-provoking, and very evocative take on climate change and the old speculative fiction standby of hunting for new worlds to inhabit. My next story pick is The Giant with No Heart in Her Body by Nike Solway in Strange Horizons. And the story, I gotta quote this one bit of the story. The truth is that I lost my arm the same summer I lost my brother. Lost is a euphemism. In fact, my arm was retrieved by the paramedics and brought to the hospital, along with the 2 fingers severed from my left hand and the various parts of my brother's body. My right arm was broken in 3 places. I can still feel the ache and itch of my poorly mended bones. Several parts of my brother's body were not retrieved. This is one of the best stories I've read this year, I think. Solway expertly weaves together so many threads in this stunning tale where a young woman's grief and loss and pain after her brother dies. She herself is maimed, and everything is woven into this sort of weft of fairy tales and myth. We start off in the somewhat recognizably real world of a car accident and hospitals. But even then, there is this presence of a crow familiar telling us that something else, another layer to the world, is close at hand. And when Solway dips into the fairy tales, into the story of a giant trying to save herself by hiding her heart in an egg, and then hiding that egg in various places, the tale soars high and cuts deep. It's outstanding in every way. Now, my next story pick is Wives at the End of the World by Avra Margariti in The Future Fire. This is a lovely love story set in a post-apocalyptic world, and it manages to be simultaneously heartwarming and heartbreaking, which is pretty much like my favorite thing in the world. The 2 women in the story hold on to each other and hold on to small bits of goodness, of memory and love in a world that is crumbling around them. Even in the darkest places, they find a bit of hope and beauty and solace in each other. This is such a brilliant story, and it feels like, I don't know, like a little bit of hope, brittle hope wrapped in sorrow. My next story pick is A Song Born by Remy Skytterstad in Reckoning. This rich and riveting story is set in Norway in the 17th century, and it takes place in a Sami community in the north. The people are nomads moving with their herd of reindeer through the seasons and through the landscape. Their old ways of life, of living in and with nature, and their old religion has been almost completely suppressed by the state and the church. But the knowledge of the old ways of living and the old ways of song and magic are not completely gone. A young boy, Kvive, is haunted by a song that came to him when he fell through the ice into a cold lake and almost drowned. That song eventually leads him to learn more about his people and the magic they once possessed, but that also means that he ends up at the knife's edge between the old ways and the brutality of the new ways. I seldom read spec-fic stories that are set in Scandinavia, and it's even more rare to find one that delves this deep into Sami culture and language and life. It's a deep and powerful read. Next up is Second Death of the Father by Kristina Jurado in Samovar. This is a dark and haunting trip into the mind and nightmares and memories of a woman who finds that her life and herself changes slowly but surely after her father dies. Jurado twists reality so tight that tension is almost unbearable, exploring the ways a person can haunt you inside and outside your own mind and body, even when you thought they didn't mean much to you. And the ending is just an absolute gut punch. It's masterful horror, and it's available in both Spanish and English in Samovar. My next story pick is A House is Not a Home by L. Chan in Clarkesworld. Chan's story about a sentient high-tech house that is trying to keep it all together, even when its inhabitants are all gone, is both subtle and piercing. There's so much brokenness here, in the house itself and in the society that it exists in. But the house is trying to fix what it can, while it also has to exist with the knowledge of its own guilt, if a house could be guilty. Chan weaves in a political subtext and a lot of emotional power into the sci-fi tale. Next up is The Family in the Adit by A.T. Greenblatt and Nightmare. And oh my goodness, this story is a harrowing, dark tale of patient cunning, violence, and terror. It's set in the home of a husband who is guarding the only exit from the terrible mines where people come to search for riches before they realize the horrors that lurk within. And in order to pass through the only door to freedom, the guest must make it through dinner. Not an easy feat when everything is poisoned and the host would like to devour you. Greenblatt perfectly captures the claustrophobic, desperate mood of the place itself and of its inhabitants. What would you do? What would you risk? Who would you kill and betray to find the way out of this hell? Next up is The Woman with No Face by Alice Goldfuss in Fantasy Magazine. I was blown away by this story. It's so rich, it's so intense, and it's so trippy. And I just love the grit and detail of it. We're in a world where some people can connect their minds to each other, an ability they explore and hone as a community in rituals when they reach a certain age. But when Ankuin is old enough to undergo the rituals, something goes terribly wrong, and afterwards her own community doesn't know what to do with her. When invaders attack the community years later, Ankuin's singular ability, I won't give away what it is, helps her lead a resistance, but even then, she's shunned and feared by many. This story packs a powerful emotional punch on so many levels. My next story pick is Vampirito by K. Victoria Hernandez in Correo magazine. And oh my, this is just such a good story. A vampire story that imagines vampires and vampire society in a way I've never seen before, as we follow a boy called Eli through his daily life, where everyday American life clashes with his family's vampire traditions, but where there's also a clash within his family between the old European vampire traditions and the ancient American vampire traditions. There's so much vampire goodness and cultural context here, and it's also an excellent exploration of the family dynamics between Eli, his parents, and his grandfather. Next up is A Study in Ugliness by H. Puello in The Dark. Basilia is considered to be the ugliest girl at her all-girls boarding school, and according to one of the school's teachers, ugly girls will never be happy. Never, ever, ever. Now, the other girls mostly avoid Basilia, and since Basilia despises most of them, it suits her just fine that they fear her. But then, one day, she realizes there is another girl, Gilda, living in her room, even though she thought she was the only person living in that room. And while Basilia is convinced that she's never seen Gilda before, everyone else at the school acts as if Gilda has always been there. Now, Gilda is beautiful, almost too perfect. And Basilia soon realizes that Gilda is not at all what she seems. This is a chilling, twisted, and razor-sharp story that got right under my skin. My next story pick is Art and Wit and Changing by David McKim in Kaleidotrope. Oh, this is an excellent flash fiction story from the latest issue of Kaleidotrope. There is terrible magic at work here as a woman waits for the birth of her child. It's a child that was definitely not conceived by regular means, and she awaits its arrival with both terror and fascination. The real magic here, though, for me, is McKim's darkly lyrical prose, which sings and flows like a spell. My next story pick is Where Oaken Hearts Do Gather by Sarah Pinsker in Uncanny Magazine. Now, this story is amazing. It's written as a discussion thread on a folk music forum called Lyricsplainer, and the thread is a masterclass in how to use a common internet format as the structure for a short story. Pinsker just does this beautifully. It's also a masterclass in how to write unsettling horror that creeps up on the reader slowly but very surely. I love how Pinsker establishes a cast of characters solely by their posts on the discussion thread, and how he weaves in the increasingly disturbing real-world backstory and repercussions of investigating the history of this song. If you want to read more about her writing process, you can check out the interview with Pinsker in that same issue of Uncanny. My next story pick is Centennial Nights by Amanda Michele in Lamplight, Volume 9, Issue 3. And that has this lovely quote, "I mean, have you ever lived a different life in a dream?" This story will most certainly haunt me for a very long time, and I mean that as a sincere compliment. Jamila has struggled with insomnia, but now, suddenly, she sleeps for days, and when she wakes up, she often doesn't seem to remember where she is or even the people in her life. As we learn more about Jamila and her partner, a complicated and conflicted love story is unspooled, and we understand that Jamila has struggled with finding happiness in the world ever since she was a child. And now her weird dreams are pulling her away from the one person who has been determined to be in her life, to be the one that she shares her life with ever since they were kids. This is a beautiful, stark, and thoroughly weird story that put a spike in my heart, and the ending is absolutely perfect in its utter strangeness. Next story pick is The Samundar Can Be Any Color by Fatima Taqwi in Flash Fiction Online. And I'll read a quote from the story. "Do not look upon the sea at night with your heart heavy with wishes," her mother warns her every dawn, "for everything has a cost," which means Dornaz must never look, for her heart is ever yearning. End quote. This is a powerful story by Taqwi about magic and longing, and about the sea that can change you, but will ask a price for that change. Dornaz is unwanted and cast out from all the places she would like to belong. Her mother sees her as a disappointment. She can't go to school and can't even read. Yet, in her dreams, so many things are possible, and maybe, just maybe, they could come true for her in the waking world if she pays the price. I love how this story delves into the fierce longing for a better life and a better world, and I love it for its sense of audacious hope. Next up is Children Between Lines by Soham Guha and Mithila Review. This is a wrenching, beautifully told, and absolutely heart-piercing science fiction story about identity and memories, about motherhood and climate change, refugees, and also very much about supremacist politics. In the story, a new kind of technology allows the state to extract and view memories, and it uses this technology in order to enforce its brutal racial purity ideology. There's a sharp, jagged edge to the storytelling here that is both painful and brilliant. Next up is Bride Knife Flaming Horse by M.L. Krishnan in Apparition Lit. Kalavati has turned 26, and her parents keep pestering her about getting married. When she finally gives in and allows her parents to post her profile on an app to find her a good matrimonial match, she ends up with two serious suitors. A man that was a ghoul but also a knife, and a woman that was a deity but also a mare. This is a strange, extremely funny, and rather trippy story about what happens when Kalavati has to choose between these two. Next up is Winter's Song by Spencer Nitke in Fusion Fragment number 5. Nicole's family has fled a poisoned and ravaged Earth and are now in a spaceship headed for the cruise liner, waiting for the last remnants of humanity to come aboard and head out looking for a new home. Aboard their escape pod is Nicole's grandmother, who is teaching him about transmogrification. "It's a family secret," she'd say. "I'll teach you when you're ready." And then she describes it. Transmogrification is really just knowledge and timing, the knowledge that everything is, at base, made up of everything else, that the future is always malleable, and that change is inevitable. Nitke's story spins this sci-fi / magic tale into something beautiful and hopeful, even in the midst of destruction and grief. And finally, my final story pick for this month is The Trolley Solution by Shiv Ramdas in Slate. This is a delightfully funny and incisive look at teaching, academia, and yes, the famous trolley problem. What happens when you're teaching courses in creative writing and you're looking for tenure, and then you're pitted against a teaching AI in what is basically a fight for your job? In Ramdas' story, the answer to that question might surprise you. I also really, really appreciate the take on that damn annoying trolley problem in this story. And those were all my story picks for this month. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next month. Thank you.